All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the last Planetary Frontlines conversation, our Finissage event for CityX Venice Biennale 2023. We want to welcome our very special guests, CityX creative directors, Alessandro Melis. Hi, Alessandro. Brent Alpres. Hi, Brent. And Matias del Campo. And maybe we will be joined by Peter Trummer. And also welcome to the people who are watching us live on YouTube or may watch us in the future. My name is Denise Luna Acevedo. I'm the founder of Pragma, and I'm honored to be here. First, I want to introduce our team. Pragma is a collective platform. We have Alex Santander in Vision and Strategy, who will be moderating today. We have Alejandro Ruiz in Management and Operations, who just joined us. Hi, Alex. And we have, of course, Catalina Silva in Visual Communication. Pragma is a design platform of multidisciplinary practices that enables the transformation of the planetary through Latin American context. We thank the curator and architect Tom Kovac for inviting us to be creative director at the 18th Venice Architecture Biennale, the CityX Venice Virtual Pavilion Knowledge Transfer, and we thank Tom for allowing us to organize this conversation.
I keep in front here. Hello, CityX Venice is coming to its conclusion this weekend. It is a virtual series of exhibitions, launches, talks, and events with some of the world's leading institutions, architects, artists, designers, and creative thinkers. CityX Venice and CityX Comms initiative continues the evolution of international collaborations, conversations, and events bringing the world together. Today, we will hear from creative directors and their pavilions. They may share their experience, their thoughts, and their projects. First, each creative director will introduce themselves and their pavilions, and then we can start the conversation. So, Denise.
Thank you, Catalina. Well, I want to introduce, I have first here Alessandro Melis, and I will read about Alessandro. Alessandro is the inaugural IDC Foundation Endowed Chair and a professor in the School of Architecture and Design. In 2021, he was the curator of the Italian Pavilion at La Biennale di Venezia. Alessandro has been nominated Ambassador of Italian Design, ADA, Italian Ministry of External Affairs in 2021, Paris, in 2022, New York, and Washington. Previously, he was director of the International Cluster for Sustainable Cities at the University of Portsmouth, director of postgraduate engagement at the University of Auckland, co-director of the TPAI program at the University of Applied Arts, Vienna, visiting professor at the Anhalt University de Sal, Politecnico di Torino, University of Perugia, and honorary fellow at Edinburgh University. The relevance of his contribution to research is evidenced by more than 200 publications, by as many citations in popular publications, and by conferences at institutions such as the University of Cambridge, MoMA, China Academy of Art, and TEDx. Recent monographs of his work include Alessandro Melis' Utopic Real World Invention Drawings, published by The Editor, and Heliopolis 21, published by Skira Editor. Welcome, Alessandro. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Denise, for having me here. It's as you can imagine, for me, it's a pleasure from different perspective. Do you want me to start and make initial comments about the virtual pavilion discussion, more in general, just to know how you prefer me to proceed?
Yeah, you can share about the intention of your pavilion, what your experience was of it, what your projects were aiming to do. Yeah, and I can, just go ahead and have that conversation. But I will let Alex take over from here. And then I will introduce, or should I introduce everyone and then What do you think, Alex?
Please, Denise, yes, please introduce Brent and Matthias, please.
Yeah. Okay, I will introduce everyone. Perfect. All right. Welcome, Alessandro. And now I want to introduce our second special guest, Brent Alpres. Let me know if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
That's right.
Thank you, Brent. Brent is a New Zealand academic at RMIT Architecture in Melbourne, Australia. He teaches design, history, and theory with a focus on all-around practices, digital ornamentality, and OSI investigative urban research. Okay, I apologize, Brent. Something is wrong with the text here. Let me just open it up again. I will go back to you here.
You're pretty good. There was alteration practices in OSINT. OSINT is open source intelligence, so perhaps I should have spelled that out.
No, it's fine. Thank you. I
it's a contraction.
Okay, I got it. Then I will continue. He uncovered Cambridge Analytica and Glue's exploitation of the mental health data of US urban populations for micro-targeted Facebook advertising and influence campaigns across church, health, and politics. He was key researcher for the documentary film People You May Know, Amazon Prime US 2020. He gave a Washington, D.C. TED Talk with Parsons professor David Carroll in 2020. He testified to the January 6th Committee on the Far-Right Council for National Policies Stop the Steal Roll. His research was featured in the revised edition of Columbia professor Ann Nelson's book on the CNP Shadow Network, Bloomsbury 2021, and in an extended New York Times Magazine cover story 2022, written by a Pulitzer Prize winners Danny Hakim and Joe Becker. He is a key researcher for two forthcoming US documentary films, Bad Faith and This Is America. Welcome, Brent. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Right, and last but not least, we have our special guest. Your bio said Dr. Matthias del Campo. You want me to be addressed? Is it that correct?
Both is fine.
Both is
However
fine.
You feel better.
All right, Dr. Matthias del Campo is a registered architect, designer, and educator. He's an associate professor of Tauman College for Architecture and Urban Planning, University of Michigan, and director of the AR2IL, the Architecture and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory at UOM. He conducts research on advanced design methods in architecture, primarily through the application of artificial intelligence techniques in collaboration with the computer science department in Michigan Robotics, of which he's also an affiliated faculty member. Matthias del Campo is the co-founder of the architecture practice SPAN. Their award-winning architectural designs are informed by advanced geometry, computational methodologies, and philosophical inquiry. Welcome, Matthias del Campo. Wow, it's an honor to have the three of you here.
Thanks for having me.
All right, well, let's begin. Take it away, Alex.
Thank you for being here. And this is going to be archived, so we may have it as a CityX event, and so for future reference. And we may touch around each of your projects. It's an unstructured conversation, but we would like to touch around the idea also of the future of exhibitions, and especially the opening up of physical exhibitions to a more democratic platforms, let's say. So, Alessandro, would you like to go first?
Well, of course, Alex, thank you very much. Firstly, also, it's a great opportunity also for me to meet you in person, because I think we know each other in different ways, but I think we never met personally. So it's a great pleasure. Yes, absolutely. I think that this is a crucial question. I would like, if you agree with me, also to talk more about these second aspects rather than our pavilion, because I think that, as you know, I'm here in how can I say, trying to highlight multiple phase of the project itself. So the being director of a creative director is important, but probably it's for me more relevant also to bring to attention to you all the discussion that we had, especially at the beginning with Tom. Why this? Why the virtual pavilion? Why now? Why it is important? Which is probably more relevant than our specific project. And I think you have touched the exactly most significant point. In 2020, when we started working on the Italian pavilion, this was the critical question, because we are, I believe, all agreeing on the fact that we are facing the most challenging period that humans ever faced until now. And this, of course, imply a clear change in the way we see architectural taxonomies, or at least this was our perspective. And in that time, we were thinking how we can do a collective pavilion. This idea of the collectivity and the community beyond this was stemming from the idea of exaptation, which is a concept that comes from evolutionary biology, that in a way is highlighting how differently from what we thought until now, in times of crisis, collective creativity is the emergency mode to overcome crisis. This is the first point. The second point is because why collective creativity is so important. According to Stephen Jay Gould, Richard Lewontin, and Telmo Pievani, who is the person who is collaborating with me on this research, the reason is because creativity is mainly a result of, how can I say, disorganized thinking that we call associative thinking. So it's mainly creativity, mainly as a result of the capability of humans, which is a very peculiar, of doing things without a purpose. Okay, so this was resonating in our brain very dramatically, because how we can extract, how we can stimulate creativity if we do exhibitions in which we order a timeline, a curatorial process, we take visitors by the end and we bring them in a certain path. By the way, this has been, you probably don't know this, but this has created me a lot of problem with my colleagues in Italy, because basically I was saying that the curatorial idea was per se dying, because it was, and I know that Richard Sennett, we have a discussion, is agreeing with me, because everything that is meant to be order-oriented in a Puritan way, as he was defining, is critical for creativity. So, and then the idea was, and here I stop, because of course this will be, I guess, very, will open up for a very extensive discussion. But then, of course, when we have discussed with Tom, is how can we have the less curatorial organized thing and more multidisciplinary oriented, because again, according to Stephen Jay Gould, the more we start taking pieces from different disciplines and redefine them in a different taxonomies, this is where creativity become helpful in stimulate strategies that overcome crisis. Okay, and basically I find interesting that the terms that Stephen Jay Gould is using are terms that are very popular today for more ethical reasons, but Stephen Jay Gould is highlighting these terms from a very different perspective, which of course make the ethical and moral aspects relevant, but it's not the point. These terms are the capability, creativity is the capability to create redundancy, variability, and diversity from an evolutionary perspective. So just to complete this very short reflection that would lead to very different things, I think that the idea of a virtual pavilion is an attempt to increase the possibility to have an extreme collective creativity platform that also encourages for high, diverse, redundant, and variable point of view, and possibly in a not ordered way. So everything that was critical for some of my colleagues regarding this idea is actually the reason why we do this. Oh, but because you are always aiming for disorder, disorganization, and they say this is wrong. Curatorial is about order, and this is why I think curatorial activity should go there. And if I have to make an example. So what would be the curatorial work for exhibition in the future? I don't see many, but I remember that I was reflecting for an article that I was writing. The depot in Rotterdam, I think, is an interesting case. And this is the case in which they are opening the door to visitors to the archives and organizing the material in a completely random curatorial path, and so on and so on. And I think it's probably not the best example in terms of what we want to achieve, but it gives an idea of the fact that there are possibilities that in reality can be activated regarding these extensive curatorial activity that goes beyond our current taxonomies.
Thank you, Alessandro. Matthias, in that regard, as we are in a Copernican turn for the species of the human, of the planet at planetary scales, and of course the future exhibitions are just a manifestation, and they must open up. In that regard, from your point of view, you so much research and contributed to the AI in architecture. How would this be? How would you see, taking off from the conversation from Alessandro and also your point of view, please, Matthias?
Yeah. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude for the invitation to be part of this conversation today. And I would also like to say thank you to Tom Kovac for a generous invitation to be part of this. And of course, congratulations to the entire team for the fantastic success of this. So I think this is absolutely necessary and deserved. And regarding your question, I mean, it is, how can I put it best? The more I know about AI, the less transparent the whole thing becomes to me in terms of how it actually influences culture, generally speaking. I think what is undeniable is that it is influencing culture, and that it's actually a sort of emerging ecology, cultural ecology, where let's say the understanding of the human being on the pinnacle of creative production, for example, comes very much under question. Yeah, we're starting to understand that there's other intelligences than our own, which is not necessarily just artificial. They can be also natural, yeah, biological, etc., etc. I think this is opening up a very interesting route for the interrogation of, first of all, what it means to be human, and for the arts, what it means to make a comment on the human condition, which art normally does in a variety of different ways. So, and if you've followed the last couple of years, I mean, starting, let's say, 2017, 2018, and so on, you saw this emergence of things like neural art, you know, which influences things like the visual arts, but also music, poetry, like a variety of different areas of cultural production, not just architecture. Or so it's actually a large-scale development that we're seeing right now, which of course also demands a different way of representing that sort of output. What does it mean to make an exhibition when the human is not necessarily the only curator, so to speak? Yeah. Or what does it mean when we try to understand the organization of an exhibition differently than we did so far? Because the typical human way to do it would be to create boxes and to sort things into specific areas and then trying to convey this to other humans. Machines do it differently, right? They don't sort stuff. Yeah, they search through it and then try to make sense out of that through a variety of different algorithms. So if you start to change the way we understand how we can represent things, objects, and so on, then you can start to think about exhibitions in a very different way. And then they're not like organized and curated cleanly from point A to B to C to D, but it's more like a really weird network that shows correlations and things that you probably didn't see before. And I think the best exhibitions are the ones where you discover things that you did not expect, that are different, that provoke you as a human. So in my opinion, like this is the area where I'm really very interested in, is that the sort of change in our own understanding of how representation works, how exhibitions work, how actually cultural production works, generally speaking. And I see that we're going through a very interesting phase right now where these sort of questions are starting to emerge. They're not answered yet, which is also good because that makes it exciting and different. But those questions are coming. And I have not yet an answer for that, even though I've invested a lot of time researching this. As I was saying before, the more you know, the more you research it, the more like you see this sort of spider webby element thing going on where you start to understand how things are connected. And that obviously can be an idea or a possibility to create new concepts about exhibitions. In our own exhibition for the CityX 21, for example, this was, I think, one of the very first exhibitions about AI and architecture, generally speaking. I don't think there was a lot of that before at all. So it was more like it was learning by doing. We were trying to put it together. And those were the first attempts to understand what are the challenges that we face as a discipline regarding AI. And so it was very classically curated, to be honest. Like you invite a bunch of people, you put them in their boxes, they present their work, and you hope that somebody will respond to it. One of the visitors, yeah. By now, I've seen like this development in a series of different AI exhibitions. It's getting more and more like in tune with this sort of new cultural idea. There is no end in sight, by the way. So we are like right at the beginning of it at the moment. So we will see what it will produce for artistic or architectural representation in exhibitions.
Thank you, Matthias, for that amazing in-depth introduction to some also of the small history, the brief history of the CityX and AI, which I think it's a mirror, it's a reflexive state of not only we do architecture from here, but architecture is done at exhibitions, because this exhibition, I see a lot of projects are new thoughts, new ideas that are emerged for the exhibition. And in that regard, Brent.
Yep.
In that regard, Brent, in your take and in your exhibition, how do you see the future of the exhibitions related to the work you're doing? And also, if you want to tie it in with Matthias and Alessandro, so we can also get a conversation going.
Yeah, I think we're at an interesting transition phase globally through coming out of COVID and the lockdowns. We had an experience where we were more separated from each other and connected to each other in different and new ways. And the interesting thing coming out of the lockdown process is that those other ways of connecting have sustained and created new economies. So I think this is a good example of a kind of opportunistic virtual model that has a long history going back to the virtual pavilions that Leon van Skyke and Tom Kovac were developing really over the last 20 years, with the idea that you could apply spatial knowledge to a virtual environment. So what does our discipline offer? This is the question that we have to ask ourselves. Not what is the definition of our discipline, but what does the broadness of our discipline, all of its diversities of practices, what does it then offer to other domains, other areas of application and collaboration? And so for me, the openness of this platform allows for it's a sort of very generous model. It has a lower threshold in terms of just the sheer physical effort and costs of mounting a physical exhibition. It carries with it its own kind of constraints, because you don't get that kind of haptic visceral physical experience. But then in doing the creative directing for my cohort at RMIT, I had a focus on a kind of cinematic model. Like, how do you kind of what lends itself to this environment. Well, the interesting thing with some of my colleagues is that they're actually kind of contending with or this contestation between kind of generative algorithmic processes and materialization and making. And those two things it's not in any way a resolved circumstance. I think there'll be complementary events where stuff that's kind of prototype, work in progress, reporting on, the initial stages of things, and then physical builds and installations, those sort of things can kind of be complementary. But as a way of kind of being able to kind of get a cross section through emerging practices, it's got a kind of again a sort of generous immediacy as a kind of medium, and we've mentioned earlier the non-hierarchical nature of the kind of the field condition really that's being generated out of all those pavilions. That you can, I think there's a little bit of self-curation for those who were in a pavilion themselves and negotiating how they would manage that kind of space. It led to some interesting conversations around the differences between what you do if you're going to install something into a space and what you do if you kind of have this other kind of virtual. So we loaded quite a few of our staff loaded a little more heavily on animated and cinematic and other media. I did as well. I mean, in my case, just within my own research, and this is partly relates to the AI question, there's a progressivist rhetoric. It's modernist, and it's still modernist, that technological progress is has an inevitable good. And we know from Oppenheimer's kind of crisis that these things aren't necessary, they don't hold. Well, World War II taught us that much. The kind of possibility, this kind of crazy last 4 days of 3 CEOs for a major AI company where there was a contestation between accelerationists and those who were seeking kind of safety barriers, I think is really, really interesting. And it seemed to come down to the fact that there was kind of a mathematical capability that had emerged that hadn't been disclosed, and that caused a crisis, threat to humanity, apparently. We don't know. That's the question of opacity that Matthias raised, I think is a crucial one. And sunlight is the best disinfectant, because when we're dealing with data, we're often dealing with an opacity. It's usually under the hood, and it's not always for good. So in my own research, I like most of my colleagues, I've had a qualitative focus in my research, qualitative practices. I research ornamentality. I have a strong precedent focus. I look at adaptive reuse and alterations. That's sort of but in the last 5 years, I've came to the conclusion that in order to get progress on positive application, you have to deal with the obstacles to that. And they sit around it outside. They're in the city, they're in politics, they're in economies that are impacting our discipline and our profession. And one of the biggest challenges we have is around data security and the role of data generally, and the exploitative nature of that data, and almost all of the conflict, the sort of polarizing conflict that we've all witnessed in the last 4 or 5 years. I apply a kind of Occam's razor to that. It's largely been in the service of maintaining a regimes that won't challenge the carbon economy and that will create obstacles for renewable economies. So the latest crazies, conspiracies that we're seeing flourishing, interestingly, in the Netherlands, which has just ended up with a different political kind of climate, but it's happening at Oxford and other, is the kind of 15-minute city as a kind of, conspiracy of it's like trying to take the lockdown experience everyone had and apply it to that. So I think we have there's a kind of question around our criticality of our practices. There's a lot of rhetoric in the emergence of technologies and what we can gain from it. I use data. I use data and in order to deal with data. I think you kind of have to kind of hit it with its own in kind. It's the only other way to kind of tackle it. So I think there's a kind of interesting series of challenges we have where some of the economies that we're working within are sort of beyond our domain, and we have to navigate through them, and we have to sort of maybe shift our professional practices to do that. Questions of authorship with AI are a really interesting one. I note that Patrick Schumacher has already released his own AI of Zaha Hadid Architects practice in order to get ahead of the fact that that they have one of the highest prompt kind of weights of any practice. So there's some interesting stuff so I think some of our staff and colleagues looking across the different pavilions and within our pavilion are kind of contending with some of those sorts of questions. There's also, I think, maybe one of the things that's interesting for me about the emergence of digital technologies is it makes available or it puts on the table an old conflict from the 19th century. Again, it's around criteria for differentiation, questions of standardization, the things that get shifted by those. The real crisis that occurred in the 19th century with mass production was mass-produced ornament. And it's kind of, that threw out all the kind of social strata.
That's what prompted Lowe's to write ornament and prime.
Yeah. And so I think one of the interesting things is these shifts that are occurring bring back these really anachronistic, but sort of probably foundational crises that we sort of buried them with an economy of standardization. And so I think one of the things that this sort of medium allows for is a kind of more fluid and responsive kind of. The other thing is digital economies are fast. The change is fast. Things get out of date incredibly quickly. And so if you can have a really responsive vehicle for kind of being able to kind of share and disseminate work, I think that's got to be of benefit to knowledge transfer in the broader sense that we're all kind of part of that kind of thematic. That's probably enough for me for the minute.
No, amazing, Brett. I agree. We're all touching in a way from their own your own theoretical framework and your own work, such in a parallel direction, and a lot of this also with Pragma in Latin America, the knowledge transfer. So how do we also the knowledge that is undiscovered in a way, yet to be ungrounded, can help the rest of the world, or can knowledge that transfer. And there's a lot of themes that we can go into, but I do appreciate what Alessandro is touching on associative thinking, also on this aspect of communities. So how does and also with I love how you put it, Matthias, is that the human is not the only curator. So how can we start thinking of with other disciplines? Is how in depth do we listen to philosophers? How in depth do we collaborate with certain scientists? And how much is it do we open the gates, let's say, of the biennales or of the exhibitions of architecture? And is there a line that we need to draw? And this this is not necessarily what I think, but I'm just provoking a conversation. Please take it on, anyone that would like to answer, Brent or Alessandro or Matthias. I think you're muted, Alessandro. Yeah, you're muted. You're still muted.
He's agitated, so we can tell he's about to speak.
There we go.
Oh, sorry, because the mobile, and sometimes it doesn't go the other window. No, just want to mention that again, I was mentioning the idea of the virtual pavilion stemming from the let's say conventional pavilion in the case of 2021. Probably what I didn't mention is that actually I don't have an answer to your question first, but for sure, I believe that we have to try to do this, not as a provocation. I truly believe that we have to do this, and this is what we have done. If you would have entered in the Italian pavilion, there was a statement that was written by Ivan Birni, which was saying the DNA is a jungle full of strange creature, which is a sentence that, well, the first thing that I've done when I received the appointment for the curatorship, I contacted Ivan Birni for several reasons and asked him if he wanted to join the curatorial team. And the second thing that I've done, I contacted Telmo Pievani, who is the evolutionary biologist and the philosopher, and asked him if he wanted to be co-curator. So I don't know if this is everybody's aware of this, because the foundation, Biennale Foundation, is very strict in what is allowed to be said or not. So I had, not because I wanted, but because I was obliged to put my name as a curator for legal reason. But the reality was that the pavilion was co-curated by Telmo Pievani and in different form by Guido Tonelli, who is a physicist, and Roberto Buizza, who is a climatologist. And again, I don't know if it worked or not. What I know is that for me has been very, very helpful, and also for the team. So the idea of collectivity was also about this, also about bringing together them and to find out if there are perspectives that could change the way we see architecture. And there is one result that I would like to say that for me is meaningful. This could apply also, for instance, to the way that AI is discussed, mostly by architects. Of course, not by Matthias, but let's say more popular magazine. By the way, I think that for me has been also groundbreaking, also text by Matthias. I mean, he's done a fantastic book about these topics. But let's say AI as an example, what emerged is that the more you move out from the field of architecture, the more you realize that architects most of the time work or think about the world of creativity in a binary way. The more you move outside, you start understanding that taxonomies can be built mostly, or let's say the revolution of taxonomy happening in biology and physicists, they are more based on idea of spectrum. The reason why I was mentioning AI is because I've read many articles also from Steve Corrid about a problem, AI being an ethical problem in terms of authorship, being an ethical problem in terms of potential exploitation of jobs, etc., etc. Okay, which are of course potential risks. But what is important is, for me, it's more important what Matthias said about how can we see the exhibition from a non-human perspective. We have to clarify that from a biology point of view, this is a starting point. There is no human and non-human in this sense. There is a perspective which is done by a spectrum where the human is an extension of any other perspective. So so to say that from a biological perspective, AI is an extension of humans, is not an alternative. Okay, so if you watch this exactly following the taxonomy that has been designed, I repeat, by Stephen Jay Gould, it's an extension. So there is not such a thing like artificiality in this taxonomy. There is just a range of extension of possibilities. By the way, if we are worried about the risk of our survival due to a machine, which doesn't exist in taxonomy, machine is not. It's a term that we use to clarify a taxonomy that is supposed to be helpful as an abstraction. But again, in biological terms, this is just an extension of an existing realm of things. So my question is that the main reason why we should go to multidisciplinarity perspective and involve them is that they allow, and this is the only result that is clear, they allow to overcome these binary perspectives in everything that we see. We can make hundreds of examples, and I have hundreds of case studies that explain this perspective. Just to make another example, so it's not CO2 emissions that are the problem of our survival. If we watch in these terms all the environmental crisis, we immediately realize that the problem is not related to the tools, it's not related to the artificiality, it's related in the way we design a taxonomy and we put ourselves in this taxonomy in a certain position. This is the only thing. If we are looking for tools that can threat our survival, we have plenty of collection of this. In this moment, we have 1 million ways to destroy humanity. In this moment, we can do tomorrow. If we do or we don't do this, it's independent from the risk of that tools to be harmful. It depends on the way humanity locate these in their own taxonomies. And the risk is there because, again, if we watch this from this perspective, we should question why for the first time on this planet there is only one human species, and why also this human species has been risking its survival in a couple of times. And I'm not talking about the nuclear bombs. I'm talking about something that happened 7,000 years ago, also in other period. We already know that we went there a couple of times, and every time we went there was because we built a binary taxonomy that was almost killing us.
Yeah, if I may add to this, because I think this is there's a couple of important points, Alessandro. Thank you very much. I think this is very interesting cues. I mean, a lot of what you were talking about has to do with the fact that we humans created this concept of human uniqueness that makes us different to everybody and anything else, which of course means that we're sort of in control of the situation, which we are not. Yeah, I mean, it's an illusion, right? But I want to add on a couple of other points because I think it was really both Brent and Alessandro raised a couple of super interesting points. So, I mean, apart from the ideas, how does this affect exhibition, generally speaking? One of the things that I wanted to address, which Alessandro touched on, is that suddenly everyone is an AI expert, which is, and this is, by the way, in my opinion, a bit. First, it is naive, and B, it's dangerous. Yeah, if you do that. You see like offering online, so people offering courses to how do you design architecture with AI in 2 days or things like that. Yeah, which of course are like rifts at the end of the day. It's not, you cannot take this serious. But I would like to address in a more professional context. There are offices, and we heard one office today, that are creating their own AIs. Yeah. And the problem is that when you do this and you say like, yes, we took like the data set of our own work from the last 50 years, and we now created this machine that can create like more of those designs for us and so on. It's fantastic and so on. You're completely misunderstanding what the potential and interesting part of AI is, because it's not about creating a closed system, and that's exactly what it is. You create a closed system of data, that basically does not allow you to create like a more influenced possibility of architectural design. You're basically repeating a morphological project. It's form. It's not about what it would mean politically, economically, ecologically, and so on and so forth. Like if you use it the other way around, as an open system, you touch on the possibility as an architect to be far more responsive with the designs that you're doing on a global scale. Because yes, it is true, there might be copyright things here, but I mean, my own opinion, by the way, is that we have to rethink the concept of authorship entirely. I don't think that we can actually continue with the system that we created about 400 years ago, where it was very clear who the author is of an object, to what's happening today, where we have multiple authors in action, and not all of them are human, right? So this concept of authorship is highly problematic in the context that we're currently experiencing. There are actually many more things that I touched on and heard here and there. For example, Brand, I disagree that it's a modern project. No, AI is not a modern project, because modernity was very eager on continuous innovation cycles, right? And AI basically learns from data from the past. It does not create or invent anything new on its own. Yeah, so in that extent, it completely contradicts with the modern project, or at least from the 20th century. Yeah. And so there's many more things. I think this could go on for hours, and I'm gonna rather stop here, because otherwise I'm gonna continue rambling about this. So, but many super interesting points. Thank you.
Matthias, Alessandro, go ahead, Brent.
Just on my comment around the modern project is more the rhetoric, not the actuality of the nature. And I think that you make an interesting point about learning from precedent and from the past. But the progressivist rhetoric is I think something that needs a kind of critical framework to because I think there's an expectation that perhaps beyond those who are directly involved in the field, but in that more broader kind of economy, that this is all it's necessarily good.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I understand what you mean. You mean that there is like this sentiment of AI being science fiction and it's the future, and we're pushing for it. Yeah, which is a sort of like superficial way of looking at the problem.
It's naive. Yeah. But it also has, though, a really strong lineage of a kind of technological determinism. The actuality of AI, and I think you pointed to that, is that it involves learning, and I think there's something really interesting if we're talking about research, education, dissemination, that the kind of iterative nature of learning is something that both that technology kind of has a bias towards, but also our engagement with that technology is probably most productive in that iterative, in engaging with its iterative nature. I've been experimenting with composing music that adapts late medieval Welsh harp music, based, but doing that with ChatGPT and doing it with ABC notation, which is all alphanumeric. It's just as an exercise, and what was interesting for me in going through that process, I was interested in that because they used to notate the ornaments back in the late Middle Ages, and the ornament had a structural role, and it had to do with sort of mediating transitions towards tension or towards resolution. So for me, the thing that I've found most interesting, and also looking at my colleagues in the sort of prototyping they're doing, where they're putting the performance of materiality in as a criteria with generative algorithmic procedures. that there's necessarily this sort of cybernetic feedback going on in order for that to kind of gain any progress. And I think AI shifts the nature of it, becomes a kind of reciprocal dialogue with the technology that's different. We've always had issues with authorship. As soon as we started using Grasshopper, we had issues with authorship because you put in an algorithm and something happens, and you don't necessarily curate every single last inch of it. So I think that's an old question in a way. But the other interesting question that AI raises, and it's good for me, since I've got a theoretical and historical background as well, is prompts. The nature of prompting, the curation of a kind of position through a prompt that can then create kind of productive conflicts or unexpected conjunctions, or all those sorts of things. That there's a kind of completely different nature of a discourse in that. I mean, there's very many different applications for AI, and I'm just really talking about the one that involves the sort of textual prompting. But I think there's a different role for a kind of critical discourse that might have a kind of generative component, and that's a new one for me. That's interesting.
I think there's a high potential for new discursive ideas and possibilities to interrogate how architecture is part of this new development. But also, the other thing that you mentioned, which I think is quite important, is you said already that learning, it's actually this change to learning systems instead of, or let me put it this way, it's a tool, yes, but it's the first tool I think that we know that learns, which is something new in that context. And what I also wanted to mention about the authorship problem is that you're absolutely right. I mean, in the mid-19th century, the same conversation when photography came up. Yeah. So yes, it is an ongoing debate.
Well, the Stones of Venice had very early photography for all of its sort of renderings. So these aren't new things. But the other question around the kind of nature of an online medium for exhibition is that I just think it lends itself to a range of media that have a kind of pertinence. They have a kind of that they are resonating now, and it's a useful medium to be able to kind of disseminate and test and explore and share that kind of work and research. I think I don't think there is an infrastructure currently in place for spatial dissemination in an online context, and it certainly isn't better. But I think we're seeing through this exhibition framework and through other emerging virtual spatial systems, it's very unclear what will settle as being kind of like a mode of successful kind of platforms, or there's really no consensus at all on this. Again, lots of rhetoric and quite a big spend, and then it kind of sort of AI kind of took over the noise. But I actually think there is something again that sort of comes out of the lockdown experience we all had, where it's certainly not going to be a bunch of avatars cut off at the waist sitting at a table, but being able to be inside a model with collaborators where you're working in real time and scripting in real time, that's an entirely different kind of scenario. And I think we're kind of just we don't as yet have a kind of collective framework for disseminating and sharing that sort of activity, which is going on within practices and collaborations. It's going on in certain educational contexts. So I think that's for me quite an interesting area. It's quite raw and pretty unresolved, and kind of interesting. But there's also a series of really sort of poor false steps by major players that have kind of, sort of made that a little harder to read in terms of where it might be heading next.
Right, I think you're touching a crucial point for the future of exhibitions, which is this infrastructure you're talking about for the dissemination of online context. Because
Yeah.
in a way, Zoom or even YouTube, it's sort of awkward. Even the in immersive spaces. So in a way, we do need to design this other space.
Yeah.
And that's a huge challenge. And the importance for me on this exhibitions is the barriers of privilege are being faded, and different ideas and knowledges can be transferred in much a speedy way and a stealthy way, and you can also pick and choose where you want to go. And also talking about the way we design our taxonomy in Alessandro Melli's is also crucial. Is we do need to design this reality. We need to if we want to move forward and start shedding away certain and I hate this word, best practices. You critique the 15-minute city, then there's a circular economy which can be critiqued. All these terms that seem to point out for better worlds are actually extensions of this world, as Matthias was touching on. If we look at these models at the moment, and Benjamin Bratton touches on it, it's in the model, not of course it's in the data, but it's also in the model, how the model is assigned. We're going to keep repeating the same and incessantly gyrating in the same axis, and we're just going to speed up to nothing, right? To the same. There's a term I call the same that involves technology. So others call it the same world or the one world, and other theorists. So in that regard, I think we touched important points that need to. I hope we had 2 more hours to touch on each of those because they're crucial and incredibly important. Closing remarks, guys. We only have a little bit over time, but closing remarks, please. We don't want to overstay with your great presence.
Well, Alex, let's. My closing remarks will be why we don't find the opportunity maybe to extend this discussion to another event, not necessarily linked to the Biennale, because I think that I will be definitely happy to join and to. Well, you are. We are here with the platform that allows this, which I understand this is designed exactly for this. So I will be very happy to continue this discussion because it's particularly fascinating and it's important to bring different voices. We meet each other, but most of the time we don't have so much time to discuss about architecture, and I would like to do so. Well, I met Matthias quite recently, but I think that we never had a conversation as long as this one before. So I would definitely like to continue the discussion, and I think that we are probably with different perspective, but on the same page on one aspects, and this is yes. It's more how we position ourselves. When I was talking about binary position that in architecture we feel are important, and we try to keep them and protect them, and this become also what nature of power. I was thinking that for instance, a classical aspects that is also very related to the idea of authorship, and I totally agree with Matthias when he said it's surprising how we use an element of the taxonomy which is relatively recent and outside the discourse of artificial intelligence to, in a way, define what artificial intelligence is, using something that is so limited. And And this made me think about, and I agree with the fact that in a way, if we really think about artificial intelligence, there's a possibility to extend our capability, human capability of redundancy, variability, and diversity. I'm talking here mostly about generative AI, not artificial intelligence in general. And again, here we have a problem of binary perspective, because since let's call traditionally AI and generative AI work basically with similar, or let's say there is not much big difference in terms of technical meaning, in terms of algorithm. We assume that they are the same or they are different. Actually, what makes the things different is how we use them and what is the what is the cooptation. This is why I see a big difference in traditional artificial intelligence and in generative artificial intelligence, despite being similar as instrument. But another term that comes to my mind is the fact that we have read, I'm going to more shallow things now, the idea of formal exuberance as a result of individual authorship, and the opposite, like the minimalistic self-constrained approach as a part of a more how can I say, democratic perspective. This is surprising because, again, from an evolutionary perspective, is exactly the opposite. It's exactly the opposite, and this is how our brain has been working until the Middle Ages, where we don't have authorship. We don't know who did the Gothic cathedral. We tried to give a name to the people, but just because we wanted to find an individual name. But the Gothic cathedral was effectively a result similar to AI of extensive data set that can be applied and reused, and there are well, of course, I've researched a lot about this, and it's surprisingly similar. So and again, we don't know who has printed his hand in the rocks in 70,000 years ago. We just know the beautiful redundancy of these drawings done by hundreds of people. So authorship was never been related to creativity. Individuality has never been related to creativity, and but so today we think that if I do something formally particularly redundant, it's because I have the arrogance as an architect to do so, which is weird. A similar concept is about functionality. Functionality is an example of a word that is a spectrum that in architecture is used as a mirror for rationality, which is an incredible misunderstanding that create a lot of problem in the way we see the world, as you said. Sorry, I wanted to do final remarks and I got closed by the enthusiasm. I didn't want to. So sorry. So I just wanted
please
to
keep going, Alessandro. You're doing. Yeah.
I was as an example the fact that I would like to continue, and then I continued. You know, this is uncontrolled. So, but my point was only the one at the beginning. I think that we open up 2 or 3 streams of discussion. I would love to keep on discussing about these aspects with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Alessandro. Matthias, would you like to go, or Brent?
Yeah, I can go. I'm gonna try to keep it a bit more brief. So I'm actually, like, first of all, I think this was a wonderful conversation, and this is definitely something that can go on for a couple of more hours, no problem whatsoever. But I would like to we talked a lot about AI, so I'm going to talk about something different. I think the idea of exhibition and the events that made this possible, I think, was a blueprint from, like, it's true, it's a remnant and a remain from what we did during the pandemic, when it was absolutely necessary, because otherwise there was no way to communicate ideas, concepts, projects, art. And so what can we learn from that? And I think that's like the thing that you need to, like, how do we continue with this? And what came to mind to me is that this event series successfully divorced physicality from a virtual environment. Yeah. And I think that it did this really well in the way how it's curated, how the presentation works, how the different galleries work, and so on. This is all great. So you were successful in divorcing it from space. Now, the next step would be to divorce it from time. Because basically, it doesn't matter whether you do this event during the time of the Venice Biennale or not, right? By the way, I think I'm the only one, yeah, right now with a really funny part. I'm actually in Venice. So I mean, I'm like physically here in Venice. Yeah, I can see like a channel when I look out the window. So I think this is like a very interesting coincidence to do like a CityX Venice virtual thing and being sitting physically in Venice while actually talking about how to virtually represent. But thank you again for the invitation. It was amazing to do this. Hopefully again next time. And yeah, it was a very fun conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthias. And that I think that's you couldn't have sum it better that you physically in Venice and virtually also in Venice. I just want to say a very small comment on piggybacking from that. We had a in our pavilion we had a Zapotec intellectual. He comes from indigenous, and he's actually building an AI from Zapotec, and he's a researcher at one of the top universities for those themes. And what he said is the only way for my people to be free is for them to live in virtuality, because in physicality we cannot do that. Just piggybacking from what you said, Matthias. Thank you so much for all your comments and for being here. Brent?
Well, I'm not at the Finissage in Venice, so I don't know if I'm jealous or not jealous. But I was at the Finissage, and I felt that was important to physically be there for the opening and to be part of the events that were part of NYIT and the general curatorial experience. And it was just interesting to. It's always a kind of a surprise when you see how each of the actual biennales in general manifest. This one seemed to have a kind of regional geopolitical soft power push with the focus on Africa and the diaspora. And I don't know really the full background of that, but that was the sense I had. Our own exhibition kind of framework that we were asked to kind of respond to was a little outside of that, but I think one of the key things is just how just the kind of institutional and regional diversity that this is allowed for is like really, really important. And it's very hard to see another medium that could achieve that. And because you're dealing with institutions that have limited economies and the opportunities to be able to kind of network in this way is kind of unique. So I think that's a privilege to be able to be a part of this. I'd like to say something about originality. Just going back to comments earlier around authorship, and there is this sort of the authority of the origin and originality, and I think that's one of the problems that was kind of being alluded to earlier with those comments around AI. There's no originality in AI by definition. It's not how it works. It may come up with innovations, but it'll do it not through originality necessarily in the way we'd normally understand it. Most creativity comes about through a kind of response to how others have done things, and some kind of dialogue. There's a lot of discourse on creative practices that involve kind of adaptations of precedent and influence. So I think that aspect is going to be amplified by AI. So this is more of a general. I think it's hardwired into that, and I think it changes the nature. This is sort of my own kind of putting my precedent, my historian's hat on. that it shifts the role of precedent. It may make it superficial. That's the other, so how it gets used, kind of this question of kind of doing things in a kind of creating kind of formal spectacle versus having a kind of ethos for how something might have some sort of more collective application. I think those are quite interesting questions that, as a profession and as designers, I think it's an interesting question to ask. I'm interested in the sort of phenomenological possibilities of the virtual, which is sort of just because it's multisensory, and it's counterintuitive that it could be more haptic to be virtual, if you think of being haptic in a different way. So those are sort of they're kind of things that I think again a little bit unresolved. They're not there yet, but they seem to me to be kind of interesting questions that this sort of medium we're in kind of starts to open up. There is also, I think, in the area of material production, a kind of lack of criteria for differentiation and variability, and that's needing to be developed, and that's sort of coming out of references back to anachronistic practices and iterative cycles of new practices. And then what that criteria is becomes questions like who's the audience, who experiences it, what's the nature of, it's not necessarily economic, it's other kind of questions. So I can see that occurring in some of the work that's emerging, where there's an assumption that digital technologies might produce a sci-fi kind of outcome, but I actually think there's possibly more interesting, very ordinary things that could come out of it. They actually have more impact that we may not even notice in the end. So I'm a big fan of background and things that occur in the background, but you have to kind of be attuned to it. And I think it's often that's to do with systems. So that's partly why I'm interested in Welsh medieval harp music, because that's actually not necessarily compositions, they're systems of composition. And they produce iterations and within certain kind of frameworks. And I can see work that's emerging kind of aligning with that kind of sensibility. So it's this kind of pre-Renaissance cultural kind of analogy, I think, maybe best way to say it. It's interesting to me. I don't have a clear view on this, but it's something that I can see kind of emerging. That's I suppose that's enough from me. Sort of little bits and pieces. I would caution. This is just a kind of general thing around data and urban data, because that's the one area where the stuff does get, commodified, and I think as a discipline we have to be incredibly vigilant when we're dealing with the brokers of that data, and how that data that we might be using for our urban developments may also be enriching other more exploitative purposes. And that's coming from my own research experience, where urban demographic data is being weaponized with mental health data at an urban scale, and really, really dangerous stuff. So the kind of the sort of positive collective desires we might have, that there's really some pretty decent thumbs on the scale that are obstacles that have to be confronted directly. And as professionals, I think we can offer something to that. And it may not be something that most are aware of, but if I have my way, they will be. But I think we're sort of being confronted by it anyway. We're seeing all the affects of it. We're seeing all the artifacts of the chaos of the last 5 years. The more that there's discourse, the more that there's sharing of knowledge, the more that there's a kind of well, the centers of culture are kind of equated with the centers of capital. But cultural innovation is often occurring in regional communities that have rich lineages. And so that's where this is also really important as a dialogue, that we kind of really kind of invest in that as a kind of ongoing kind of community platform. And that's what I'd be kind of pushing for. And whether that's in a Venice Biennale, that's high profile. We've got lots of hits. If you put the word Venice Biennale in front of a website, you get a lot of hits.
Thank you, Brent. Oh my God, guys, thank you so much for all of your questions, your comments. Thank you so much for being here, Alessandro, Matias, and Brent. I'm just hearing you and eager to continue the conversation. I'm just gonna close up for a couple of minutes here. I just want to say thank you again to Tom Kovac, who invite us, all of us, to be creative directors in this amazing platform where we can share and our knowledge and our experience. And thank you to all of you for being here. And just as a closing remark, from hearing all of you, these problems of AI, AGI, and the practices and our humanness and what it means to be human, there's definitely a pressing urgency to confront, design, and intervene in this world that we're facing that is asymmetrical crisis. And it has exalted this asymmetrical crisis, existing practices that engage at the front lines of change, and you are at the front line of that change. And in that regard, Pragma, our pavilion Planetary Frontlines, aim to connect with these practices, these multidisciplinary practices, and people and humans, and that includes you, of course. So as a celebration of ending, and thank you, Matias, for being for your body being in Venice in a way is officially a Finissage event because of that. So thank you, Matias and Alessandro. Definitely, this is a Finissage event that's going to be passed on as the first conversation of many, I hope. And as a finale event for us at Pragma, I want to thank Leon, who is the one that always alerts me of anything and is always working. Also want to thank Alex Santander for always moderating in a very, very precise, eloquent, and elegant way. He's the best moderator there is with his amazing ideas. Thank you. And Alex Reese, who cannot join us on camera, but he's there. He's the one that made things possible as well. And Catalina, who she had to leave, but she's behind everything Pragma is doing in regard to visual communication. Without her, no one would know about Pragma. And then I want to thank Mario Alvarado, who's also here with us, and Ian, who is also part of the team. And one of the things that we are pushing is the collective and being seen as a collective and not a single human, because only as a team are things made. So let's be a team, a human team for the planet and for the world. So thank you everyone for being here, and goodbye. Thank you.
Yeah, see you soon. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye. Thank you, Brent. Did you stop recording?